Hello, everyone, and welcome to our special education Q&A series. My name is Samantha Pierce. I am the founder of Sanchia Calendar Inc., a nonprofit that works to enrich the lives of people with developmental disabilities and youth in residential care. I am also the founder and owner of Neurodiversity Consulting, which works to advocate for and educate and empower families and individuals with developmental disabilities. Joining me today is my colleague Liza Citron.
Hello.
She is an adult, an autistic adult who works with me in helping to develop the training and the education and the advocacy piece. And today we were going to talk about life transitions with my other colleague, Scott Davis. However, he is in Connecticut and we had some crazy storms yesterday, so he doesn't have power. He won't be able to be joining us. However, there is a certain amount of controversy going around social media here in Central New York about some comments that have been made about students who receive special education services, and we're going to have a conversation about what kinds of attitudes about special education and disabilities those comments represent and what that means for people with disabilities. Before we go any further, first, my standard COVID work from home disclaimer. We are all working from home. We all have our families all up in our faces and our spaces. Sometimes your family wanders through the conversation and may happen on camera or may show up on audio. Someone left the phone in here with me, so you just heard that. So let's extend a little bit of grace to each other because we're all in the same boat. We're all in this together. And my second thing is that if you have comments or questions, go ahead and type them into the chat box on your laptop. It's on the upper right-hand corner of your screen. And we will monitor that so that we can answer your questions and react to your comments. Also joining me today is joining Liza and I today in the conversation is my daughter, Sophia Pierce, and she will be bringing to this conversation the perspective, one, of a peer of students receiving special education services, and also the sibling of people who have received special education services. So we're just going to dive right in right now. And so on a news article in a local newspaper here in Syracuse, talking about the school district's reentry plans, someone commented that it was a shame that students who were receiving special education services were the ones who were going to get to go back to school on a close to full schedule, because in her estimation, special education students with disabilities weren't going anywhere in life. And so, it wasn't really necessary to provide the time and the resources for them to go to school and receive an education. In her estimation, students who don't have special needs, who don't have disabilities, those are the ones who need to go back to school full time because they have, in her words, potential. And those comments kind of set off a firestorm because everyone was like, oh my goodness, you can't say that about kids with special needs. You can't say that about kids with disabilities. Those kids deserve an education just like everyone else. And, everyone was doing their hot takes and sharing her comments all over social media, and she proceeded to double down. And I sat back and watched. One, because for me, the attitude that was on display in her comment, it's nothing new for me. It's something that I've heard before. I hear it often. Anytime there's a discussion of education funding, special education, people with disabilities, there is always that attitude that rises to the top that, well, people with disabilities and students receiving special education services, well, they're not really getting anything out of it. there, that's a lot of resources put to people who aren't really going to grow and develop. That attitude is ingrained in the way we think about education, the way we think about disability services. So I wasn't exactly surprised. I don't do hot takes, so I didn't comment on it until this morning, where I said her comments are not a surprise. Liza, what was your reaction when you first heard those comments?
Just sorry, just that I'm personally a college education student, and I'm specifically hoping to be someone who does help to educate disabled students. So this seems to run counter to essentially everything that I am doing and everything that I'm working towards. There are more complicated things that, I thought than that, but the main thing was definitely this counters absolutely everything that I am trying to do with my life, these opinions and attitudes. And I knew that I would have to face them from the beginning. But to see someone so, not blatantly, I guess brashly saying what they think about this is, I can't say it's surprising, but it's definitely difficult to deal with and something that needs to be dealt with.
Sophia, how about you? What was your reaction when you first heard about the comments? Okay.
You can't do that.
Yep.
My first reaction was like this morning, a couple hours ago, when you said, "Hey, do you want to come in and join the call today?" And I was like, "Hold on." She said, "What?"
Yeah, I think that's.
Wait a minute.
I think that was basically all of our thoughts.
Yeah, and for me, the reaction was like, "Oh, well, at least she's honest. At least she's honest with her thoughts."
Yeah.
And then the second thing was like, "Oh, wow, look at that! People are paying attention to what she has said," and it wasn't just parents of students who receive special education services that were responding negatively to what she had said. It seemed like the whole community kind of rose up to focus on this one person and her negative comments and make sure that she paid for saying this out loud. But still, still the thing for me is, well, she's not the first person to say things like that in public. So what do you think of, what do you, Liza and Sophia, what do you two think about that?
I don't know.
I'll go first. It's definitely a show of support to disabled people that there were so many people reacting negatively. But the thing is that the internet as it is now and social media as it is now can amplify opinions to a degree that we've never before seen. I mean, anti-vaxxers, when the Lancet article was published and disavowed, that opinion remained in a small few people. But now we're hearing so much of that because of the way that social media allows even the smallest opinions to rise and gather support because they're the noisy few. And I think that can apply to any of these things, including that opinion. There are going to be people who are going to support her, and they're going to continue to rise to the top. So it needs to be dealt with. We can't just see it and say, and just don't do anything. It needs to be dealt with.
Right. And Sophia, if you have anything to add, feel free to chime in, interrupt like you normally do.
I to know that there was so much backlash towards these comments, but it really isn't a new thing to be hearing. What is a new thing is to see the backlash, people supporting disabled people and being like, hey, no,
you can't do this.
That.
Yeah.
That is kind of new. That is an eye opener, and you know, I'm a little bit cynical. I'm looking at people focusing on this one individual, and you know, reposting her comments and saying this is bad, you can't say that, and saying, you know, don't patronize her business, don't patronize her husband's business, make sure she knows that we don't agree and that we don't approve. What are people going to do with all that energy and all that outrage once she steps off of the public stage? Are people going to bring that same kind of energy and passion and intensity to advocating for people with disabilities? Are they going to bring that same energy and intensity? Are they going to show up like that for conversations about funding for special education services? Are they going to show up with that same energy and intensity and laser focus when it comes to having the conversation about funding the social services that support people with disabilities? Is that same intensity going to be there when it comes to the budgetary debates that determine the level and quality of service that's available for people with disabilities? I'm not sure that, I don't know. I will be pleasantly surprised and excited if that same level of focus and intensity remains when it comes to advocating for services and budget allocations for people with disabilities. I wouldn't be surprised if it all dissipates and everybody goes back and moves on to the next.
Yes,
thing.
I kind of feel like it's performative in a way, because this is some little thing they can do just to share and get angry, so that they can say that they support disabled people. Because when there's something blatantly wrong, it's easier to get angry at this one person and just do that in the moment than to actually put your work into supporting the disabled community and helping and fighting for what they need if you're not disabled yourself. There's definitely an aspect of performativity to it. I think all of these gestures that people, most of them, the majority that people tend to do and say they're for disabled people, are often performative allyship.
Right. And that's something that's really, I don't know. I see it and like, okay, it's nice to know that, but when it comes to the everyday boots on the ground.
Yeah, and I'm aware it's a cynical attitude, but I've seen enough to know that whatever we get, we often have to fight for tooth and nail. And it's going to be us fighting for it, not the other people. So I've seen too much, I guess, to be maybe not cynical, but realistic.
Yes. Sophia, any comments that you want to add about the level of outrage right now and whether or not that will change its focus?
I think just because it is so much right now, and that more people are on social media right now than they would be otherwise, I think that it's gonna stick with some people, but ultimately is still gonna kind of fade out.
Right. So we might gather some new allies who are ready and willing to work in the trenches, but Not everybody's going to be able to sustain that kind of effort. One of the things that I did want to discuss is, there was the first initial comment about how students in special education aren't going to go very far in life, aren't going anywhere in life. And then as people began to push back, then this person doubled down, talking about how the kids who are screaming and banging their heads and hurting people, they aren't going to get anything about education. And that stereotype of a student with a disability who is screaming, who is flailing around the room, who's banging their head against things, who's lashing out at people, that's a very common stereotype, a trope that is used oftentimes in discussing disability and services and resources for people with disabilities, to say that, well, these people aren't going to get anything out of it. And the thing that always strikes me is, well, what did you do to help this person who was screaming and banging their heads and flailing and lashing out and running around the room? Those behaviors. Those are all behaviors that communicate that the person engaging in them is in distress.
Yes, exactly.
So my question always is, when you see someone engaging in behaviors that clearly communicate that they are in distress, what are you doing? Are you standing back and saying, well, this person obviously can't get anything out of an education, we don't need to allocate any resources for this person? Or you're putting on the thinking cap, turning the brain on, and thinking, why is this person banging their head? Why is this person lashing out? Why are they screaming? Why are they running around the room? Are they perhaps in pain? Are they perhaps afraid? Are they perhaps trying to get away from a situation that they don't like? There is, just the observation that this person is doing these things, and therefore that means they are not worthy of any effort to care for, is really disturbing. How do you, Liza and Sophia, see that when people bring up these kids are banging their heads and screaming and all that other stuff? How do you view it when people bring that up?
Well, I've got a couple of things, if I may.
Liza, I'll start with you and then Sophia.
Sorry. But I've got a couple of things. First of all, what I've seen is that when you try to categorize kids like that, or even individuals like that in general, you're enforcing, especially in autism, you're enforcing a false dichotomy between those who you see as okay and acceptable and those who you don't. And that is just not, because there are reasons for the behavior, like you said. I also think that when you label someone as not worth educating, or not worth this, not worth that, not going to go anywhere, that's a very short jump from saying that they are not giving back to society. And that is a very short jump from eugenics. I'm not equating the two. I'm just saying that they have a lot in common, and you can very easily go from one to the other without even really realizing it. And those are the attitudes that you are essentially supporting when you say these things. And who were some of the most well-known practitioners of eugenics, albeit not mainly on the disability scale, but disability were included? Nazi Germany. And I just don't think you should be supporting any sort of ideas that could lead to eugenics, or that you're essentially supporting eugenics, if you realize what you're doing and you continue to do it anyway.
Sophia, what about you? What's your impression, your attitudes, when you hear people talking about, well, these kids are just banging their heads and flailing and screaming and hitting people, and we don't need to be spending resources on them. What is your response, your reaction when you hear that?
Yeah, I think you're definitely right that, yeah, if a child with a disability is acting that way, they usually are in distress. And I think you and we both know that just from experience, with Ethan and Isaiah especially. We know the signs. If he's doing certain things, we're like, oh, something's not right. He's not comfortable. We gotta figure out what it is. If we know what it is, we're gonna, try to put a stop to it so that he feels better and isn't doing those things. And I think if people are equating that kind of behavior, which to some people like us who, recognize it and know that it means one thing, they just kind of equate that to, oh, well, they're not going to be able to do anything. They're always like this. And it's like, no, you could just observe for a little bit and figure out why they're acting that way. And it would solve so many problems because you figure out why they're acting like that. And be like, oh, well, if we just change this, then they won't be doing that. And then they will be able to, be able to learn things and get things done better. And
well, I know we were talking, what was it, 2 weeks ago, about how, and this can be partially responsible for these behaviors. The amygdala is overactive in autistic people, so we are always in that state of fight or flight, and that is not conducive to learning. So anything you can do to mitigate that, of which these symptoms, these actions, are potentially a sign of, you're increasing the ability for the child to be in an environment that's conducive to learning.
Yes. And I think that's the thing that frustrates me about that stereotype. People hold that stereotype up as evidence that, we don't need to invest in these lives because they're not going to get anything out of it. Well, and we don't need to invest in these lives because they're not going to go anywhere. Well, in a way, you're right, because you're looking at someone in distress and you're leaving them there.
Yep.
So if you leave them in distress, you're absolutely right, they will not go anywhere. If you leave them in distress, you're right, they won't benefit from resources applied to them. However, if you see them in distress and engaging in behaviors that signal distress, and then apply yourself to relieving that distress, well, guess what? They can go somewhere. And they can accomplish things because people invest the time and the resources in helping them figure out where it is they want to go in life. And then coming back to, well, these people aren't worth investing in the resources in. Yes, they are. We all are worth the resources and investing in. And Liza, you're right that when you start deciding who's worth investing in and who isn't worth investing in, and you start to not recognize the intrinsic value of a person, then that does lead you down the road to making some very scary decisions. And world history is full of examples of what happens when we do that. Liza, you mentioned the regime in Nazi Germany. One thing that people don't often recognize is that the attitudes that we now look back at Nazi Germany and are like, oh my gosh, that's so horrible, how could they ever think like that? Their attitudes were very common throughout the world at that time. They were just the ones that were the most efficient at it and got the most attention for it. But those kinds of attitudes were extremely common, especially when it comes to people with disabilities.
Yeah.
A lot of people with disabilities died in Nazi Germany, and no one recorded their lives or their deaths.
Well,
In
worldwide.
the United States at that time, people with disabilities, nobody saw them because they were kept at home because their families were trying to protect them from everybody else, or they rotted away in institutions or on the street.
Well, yeah, institutionalization and forced sterilization is a form of eugenics that I don't think people realize is actually eugenics, but it is. Eugenics is not just killing a people group, it is trying to obliterate it in any way and not allowing disabled people, forcibly disallowing them to reproduce, is a form of eugenics because they will not carry on their line and you will be obliterating that people group.
And there are people still alive in the United States today who were targeted with forced sterilization because of their disabilities. So this is an ancient history. This is my lifetime.
Yeah, and we still have the attitude that disabled people can't be in fulfilling relationships and they cannot be sexual, which is completely untrue.
Sophia, I wanted to tap into you because I asked you to join us today for your perspective as a peer of students who receive special education services. And I know that we have had conversations about, helping your peers to advocate for themselves in terms of making sure that their teachers are following their IEPs. And, you've grown up all your life with developmental disabilities, being raised by someone who's got a developmental disability. So I wanted to kind of get your perspective on how you see these attitudes of people, students with IEPs receiving special education services aren't worth those services and shouldn't have access to them. And, we should put like other students first. How do you see those attitudes cropping up among your friend group? And, back when you guys were actually physically in school, how did you see that play out?
I think that's just awful. Because, I think it is. But I don't know. Within my friend group, I don't think that really exists. Just because, I've had to help at least one of my friends with the needs of their IP not being met. And, they would tell me things about, like, decisions that their resource teacher or that their content teachers were making. And I'm like, that's not legal.
Yeah.
They're like, what? And I'm like, that's not legal. They're not supposed to do that. But I think in general in school, it is a lot more prevalent, more in people that don't really understand, the life of disabled people going to school, whether they have like ADHD or Down syndrome. Like, it's a struggle for everyone, and all of those struggles are different. And I think lots of kids at school don't see that at all, and they just kind of make fun of it, or they see it and they just don't really understand it. But none of them really bother to understand it, because I don't think they think anything much of it, even though we do. And it's weird because I'll be here and I'm like coaching my friends on what to say to their teachers, and I'm talking to you about how I was talking to them, and I'm like, yeah, no, that's totally not legal. And then you're like, yeah, absolutely not, no. And then there's everyone else at school, and they just have no idea that these are going on. And if they do know that it's going on, they just don't understand it, or they don't care to understand it. And it's kind of sucky.
Yeah, yep. And it's amazing.
It's not weird.
Yeah, it's amazing how much that is technically illegal people can do and not have it realized.
Yeah.
And you're saying that the way everyone expresses is different. That's why we have the I in IEP, individualized education plan. It's going to be different for everyone, and people need to realize that.
Yeah, and the temptation, the kind of default when you're dealing with like these juggernaut bureaucracies in schools and in disability services is that they like crank out this cookie cutter template of these are the services that we offer, and there you go, versus a truly individualized approach where the first question is, okay, what do you need? The way that we function is that, well, these are the services that we provide, and pick the one you want. But the approach that we actually need, that's true individualization, is to first ask, what do you need? And then be ready to pony up, to put up when person tells us. And also be ready to help the person figure out what it is that they need. Because to be honest, we don't always know what we need until someone offers, kind of walks us through the process and helps us figure it out.
Yep.
So coming back to those comments that kind of started us on this conversation, where the idea is that, well, people with disabilities, students with disabilities, they're not going to go anywhere in life anyway. Well, no, they're not, if your attitude at the very start is that they can't. If the attitude at the start is, well, let's see how far we can get this person, let's see how far this person goes, then you have something else entirely that happens. If when presented with someone who does bang their head and who does practice self-injurious behavior, if your attitude when you see them is, this is an individual in distress, let's help relieve their distress, well, guess what? They're not going to be banging their heads anymore, are they?
Yep.
So then thinking about, well, what do these attitudes mean for people with disabilities in the community? What does that say about how we are actually valued, how society actually sees us? Liza, you want to take a stab at that one?
This relates to what Sophia was talking about, just that I don't think people really think much of it or think of it in a certain way because there's this stigma built up around it. And there's just, that's going to take a lot to overcome, but you need to do it. You need to look at someone and see disability as not a bad thing, but just a different thing.
Sophia, how about you?
I don't know.
I don't put you on the spot here, but
yeah.
What was the question? I forgot.
Yeah, I mostly did too.
Sorry, I'll try to be more concise, but the fact that these attitudes are floating out in society, that people with disabilities aren't worth the investment, aren't worth helping. What does that say to you about our society's value of people with disabilities?
Oh, I think really shows how much a lot of people in our society don't find any value in people with disabilities, even though there's so much more, because people with disabilities, yeah, they're not capable of things that most other people can do, but they're still capable of so much more that you might not be able to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really cool. And I personally don't know why people wouldn't find that valuable. But I also think it comes from, you know, that kind of superiority that a lot of people tend to have, whether it be like white supremacy or ableism or whatever it could be. It's just, these people aren't me, therefore they're lesser than me.
Yes.
And that's just stupid anyway.
In-group, out-group bias.
That's deep. That's very insightful. This where we divide people into, you know, the in-group and the out-group, and we decide that the out-group are not as good.
Yes.
You know, however and wherever we make those divisions, whether they're along race, gender, class,
religion,
ability, religion, whenever we make a distinction like that and decide that the out-group, those other people, are less than us, that's wrong. And whatever you want to call it, whatever ism you want to call it, it's wrong. Because a lot of times the distinction between in-group and out-group is pretty arbitrary.
Yes, arbitrary.
And it's changing all the time. And a lot of us, we are in lots of different in-groups. I'm in the female in-group. I'm in the black in-group. I'm in the married in-group. I'm in the mother in-group. I'm in the autistic in-group. I'm in the nerd in-group. I'm in the Christian in-group. I'm in all of those different groups, and at any given time, in any given situation, the in-group that I am in is somebody else's out-group, and someone else's less than out-group. So what that says about it is that we really are all in the same boat. But when you narrow your focus only to your in-group, and you add value only to your in-group, and you take away value from the people that you put in the out-group, that's a problem. And that is something that we see that's very prevalent when it comes to talking about people with disabilities, people with developmental disabilities, people with intellectual disabilities. They get shoved into the out-group, or we get shoved into the out-group quick, fast, and in a hurry, and it's like, oh, those people. And there is the tendency to want to take away value, because we have this skewed idea of how to value a human being, and we value a human being based on what they can produce. Which is an attitude that, again, leads to all sorts of really horrible things being done to people, because, oh, this person can't produce what I want, so they are of no value to me.
I think our economic system certainly doesn't help with that, because it is focused on product. Capitalism is just focused on product.
Yeah, there is that problematic aspect where your focus is only on what people can produce for you, and you forget that, whether or not people are producing something, they do have that intrinsic value that has no relation whatsoever to what they can produce.
Well, I think that's been shown. That tendency has been shown by the pressure on social media to be productive, even while we're in the midst of a global pandemic. Even during stay-at-home orders, people pressure you to be productive. And I don't understand it. I don't.
Yeah, I just redefined my definition of productive.
Yes.
I ate breakfast. I was productive.
I took a shower.
Yes, took a shower. I was productive. I did not yell at the kids. I was productive.
Yep.
So redefining what we think of being productive is essential to creating a society that values human beings, and also moving our focus, our valuation focus, away from productivity to, you know, recognizing intrinsic value is also extremely important. I wanted to remind everyone who's listening in, or watching, that you can submit comments and questions for us. We've got a little less than 20 minutes left of our time allocated. So please feel free to chime in and share your thoughts. Excuse me, if you have any questions for the three of us, please share those as well. So getting back to what I was talking about how we value people, when your focus is only on what people can produce as a measure of their value, then yes, you're gonna come up with things like, well, these kids in special education aren't gonna go far in life, so we don't need to help them go anywhere at all, because they're not going to, you know, the assumption that they're not going to produce then means that they are not valuable and not worth investing in. But if the focus is on the fact that you're a human being and you're alive, then yes, they do become worthy of investing our time and our resources and our emotional care to see that they also thrive along with everyone else. So Liza, Sophia, do you have any comments on that?
No.
Just a few things.
Okay.
This opinion about disabled people in society can be pervasive, affecting basically every different aspect of their life. It can crop up in custody battles, it can crop up in divorces, it can crop up in jobs, it can crop up in everything that you can do where there's a possibility to see disabled people as incapable. And with that, you can potentially ruin someone's life. And you don't want to. And disabled people still cannot get married. Those of them that receive Social Security benefits, for example, they cannot get married because they are going to lose those benefits that are keeping them alive. And I think that's partially rooted in the fact that just people don't see disabled people as equal, but I think it's also rooted partially in the fact that people don't see disabled people as even capable of having a successful relationship or see them as sexual. I will look at that question and read it out.
Yep, sure. You want to read that? Because I can't see my screen right now.
Jamie says, my frustration with the current social media controversy is that although the comments were horrific and egregious, families are generally unsupportive of students with disabilities. Most are supportive behind the screen, but also don't want these children in their child's classroom. Oh yes, I've thought of this as an issue that I'm going to have to face when I become a teacher, that especially if I am in a separate special education room, that this is where people are going to want their kids all the time, or parents of other kids rather are going to want the other kids all the time, even when the most effective environment for learning is primarily in the general education classroom.
Yeah. And I've seen that attitude, what Jamie has expressed in, you know, conversations about, well, we need a separate school for these kids.
Yep.
We need kids to be in separate classrooms. We need them to be over there somewhere else away from us. Yeah,
Yes.
sure, educate them, just don't do it with our kids.
Yeah, I think it's also counterintuitive, because the only way you are going to break down that stigma that is putting these disabled kids into separate, isolated special education rooms is to have them in the general education classroom, talking with their able peers and just having it seen as a normal thing. So it's a kind of a catch-22 there, because the thing that you need to dismantle this idea and the things causing this idea are exactly the reasons that people don't want, that people are having this idea and in trying to enforce it.
Yeah. And when you try to like change the conversation and shape the conversation to, well, let's create a classroom setting, a learning environment that works for all of the students.
Universal design, yeah.
You get this pushback like, oh no, we can't do that. We don't have the resources to do that. Teachers don't have the time to do that. Like, yes, I know, which is why we keep advocating.
Give them that.
More
Give them
resources dedicated to education and special education, because teachers don't have the resources that they need to teach all of their students effectively. They don't have the time that they need to teach all their students effectively. They don't have the staff support, the administrative support to do their jobs effectively for all of their students. We know. This is why we keep advocating for more resources. Sophia, do you want to chime in on this?
And then I'll read the question.
There are people who are like, up front, they're like, yes, educate the kids, but don't educate them with my kids.
And after that, I'll read the comment that someone gave.
Yeah.
Sure.
I think...
You can be honest.
I'm trying to think of the right words. First of all, that kind of mindset is extremely harmful.
Yes.
To students with disabilities and to students without disabilities, because students with disabilities, they might end up with this mindset like, oh, I'm not worth being with the other students. I'm not,
yes.
I don't belong there. And then regular students they might end up with this mindset where they also believe that. They believe that disabled students aren't supposed to, be with them. They don't deserve that. They're not allowed to do that.
Yep.
And that's not what we need.
As a disabled
we need to go away for that.
As a disabled student, I can attest to that. The attitudes that I faced when in school were of unbelonging, were of stigmatization, were of you shouldn't be here.
Just like you can't sit with us, but so much worse.
Yes.
Yeah. And let's see. I think Jamie has another comment. Can you read that first?
Yep.
Liza?
Sorry. This controversy requires peer families to not only talk the talk, but also walk the walk. Many will not do that when push comes to shove. Yes, that's...
Yeah. That is a hard thing to deal with. And for families who are living with disabilities, part of the struggle is that we are so overwhelmed, we are so stressed out, we can't handle another thing. We're treading water. We're working really hard to just keep our heads above water, and it's really hard for people to when people take a look at us and see us working that hard, and they're like, "Oh, you're so strong. You're this. You're that. You're the other." No, throw me a freaking life preserver, okay? Come on.
Yeah, don't just
strong. But you know what? I shouldn't have to be this strong.
Yep. Don't just use me as inspiration porn. Just actually help me.
Yes. And actually come alongside.
Yeah.
And stand with me and help carry this. Help carry the burden. 2, help change the system so we don't have this burden.
Yeah, because you're more likely to be listened to than we are. Because
yeah.
And this goes for all aspects: race, disability, age, anything.
Sophia, you want to jump in on that one?
No, that's pretty well said.
Okay. All right. We've got about 10 minutes left. So if there's any other questions or comment that you want to make, please do. We really are here for like the back and forth and the interaction with you. I'll keep talking if you don't want to do that, because I can talk forever on this particular topic.
I don't mind speaking up if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So I have sort of a unique perspective on this, only because the person that is getting all the media attention, her child actually goes to my son's school.
Okay.
And one of the things that's happening within that building is that one of our other buildings is undergoing a renovation. So they're going to take half of another building's students and move them into my child's building, which means in order to make room for typical children, they're removing our 811 program for students with emotional disabilities and moving them to another building. Now, the current building that we're in, not one family brought up the fact that we're displacing an entire program and moving them to another building to make room for typical kids. So I spoke up for that. I spoke up at our board meeting about it, that they feel this program feels like collateral damage, right? That it's like, we'll just shove these kids into another building and it will be fine. I also went to the parent listening group for the building that this program is going to go into. And my frustration with the current controversy is that she said it in the most crude and awful way, but the listening session that I went to and the families that stood up and spoke and did not want this program in their building, it's an attitude within this entire district. And if people are hiding behind the screen thinking that this person is the only one that feels that way, it's an underlying attitude within this district, and people are hiding behind this person.
Yes. And thank you for sharing that, Jamie, because that goes to the heart of my whole point, and the reason why I'm talking about this today is that what she said is what people actually think. This is what actually motivates people to do things. And I'm not at all surprised that in your district, they're like, oh yeah, we can just move the kids in the 811 room, and yeah, Bob's your uncle. And I'm not surprised at all that parents are like, yes, please move these kids. And then other people are like, no, don't bring them to my building.
Yep.
We've had to deal with the same kinds of attitudes in our own school district. And students with disabilities, students receiving special education services, are very often an afterthought. Unless I'm in the room and I'm like, what are we doing for the kids with receiving special education services? What are we doing for those kids with IEPs and 504 plans? I'm usually the one, I'm one of a handful of people that when we're in the room, kids with special education needs, they get to be front and center in the conversation. And unless we are there forcing that conversation, it's an afterthought. It is always an afterthought. We had some school building renovated recently, and it was an afterthought. Well, why are you putting the special education services room next to this room that's going to get really, really loud?
Yeah, it was the new band room. Is that what they did? Because I remember that was their original plan.
That was their original plan until myself and other parents were like, excuse me, this is a bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
That's
What
not
did they
gonna
end up
help
doing
you."
after the fact? Okay,
Uh,
so
yeah, we had them change that. Because this is the fight that families face every day. There are, you know, this one individual, she said out loud what everybody was thinking, and for me, the outrage, I'm very cynical about the outrage. It's like, oh, that's nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but like in 5 minutes time, when your attention is captured by something else, we'll still be living with those attitudes.
Yes, exactly.
yeah.
There are people who might dress it up in more flowery language, like, oh, this is for the good of the kids. We can't have them here because it's not good for them. Well, if it's not good for the kids with disabilities, it's not good for the kids without disabilities. Which
Yeah.
is
Yes.
like, no. So yes, those attitudes, they're not even buried that deep, to be honest.
No.
They're not buried that deep.
No.
And families live with that day in and day out. People are paying attention now. I don't know how much longer they're going to pay attention.
Because they've seen how hard it is to educate their own kids.
Yeah.
Do you think, hopefully that will generate some empathy? Yes.
I would hope, but I doubt it, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're a little bit of a cynical bunch here. But that doesn't stop us from advocating every single day anyway.
What did you say, Sophia?
I kind of want to go back to the renovating the school and removing a program that's there and moving it to a different building to make room for students coming in from. Why not just put the students that are going to come into that building?
Exactly.
Yes.
Like, that was my first thought when I heard that. I'm like, wait, why would you do that?
Because they want us to be further away from the able kids, basically. That's the only.
Yeah.
That's literally the only explanation I can possibly think of.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and
That's so dumb.
And thinking about, well, yes, dear, it is dumb, but we have to use our big words. Thinking about the disruption that is going to happen for the students that they're losing their space that they're familiar with and comfortable with. That is extremely important for students who are receiving special education services, having some consistency, which none of us have had since March. Welcome to a little purview of what it's like living with disabilities. No
Yep.
consistency. You don't know what's happening
Nothing.
from one moment to the next. And the
That
people
was-
who are in charge, who are supposed to be helping, they don't know what's happening from
Yep.
one moment to the next
Especially
either.
when you've got the combination of neurodevelopmental disabilities and physical disabilities like I do. You don't know whether it's going to be executive dysfunction one day, your body failing the next, or the combination of both, or the combination of executive dysfunction and brain fog.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that, the fact that they thought, oh, we can just take these kids who are the most sensitive to disruption and disturbance and just move them someplace else instead of the other kids who are not, theoretically not as sensitive to the movement and disruption, and take them and put them in the other place.
Yep.
It's like,
You're
okay.
working on a fundamental misunderstanding of disability, specifically generally developmental disability, and you are working on a unwittingly ableist ideology.
Yeah. So to wrap this up, because we are just about out of time, and I want to respect everyone's time. These comments that are getting so much attention and generating so much outrage, and on social media for I don't know, has it been about a week? I don't know. One, they're not that uncommon. a lot of people think this way about people with disabilities. A lot of people think this way about special education. They might not say it in as cruel and as harsh of a way, but they think it nonetheless. And that belief drives their decision making. So, in a way, I'm thankful for her to being honest and saying this out loud, because then it gives us the opportunity to be like, hi, yes, we know people think that way. She's not an outlier.
No.
She's actually middle of the road. What makes her an outlier is that she said it out loud and she got caught.
Yeah.
That's about it. That's it. And that's the only reason why we're talking about her now is that she said it in public and somebody noticed and called attention to it. But these attitudes are deeply ingrained in the way that we approach education and social services for people with disabilities. And that attitude needs to change. I want to thank you all for giving of your time and being here. Thank you, Sophia, for filling in a pinch. And we wish Scott well as he waits for the authorities there to get his power back on, so that he can join us again next
when
week.
did his power go out? When did his power go out?
Last night, I guess there was a big storm coming up the East Coast, and a lot of people have lost power. And our presenter for today, Scott, was one of them.
We almost did.
So, hopefully Scott will join us next week, and we will get to have the conversation about life transitions. We might touch on this topic again because Scott is an older adult. He went to school pre-ADA, pre-IDEA, so he remembers the bad old days, like the really bad old days. When institutionalizing people with disabilities and developmental disabilities was still a routine thing. So he has a really in-depth and unique perspective on these kinds of things, and we'll be talking with him hopefully next week. His power will be back, and he'll be able to get online with us.
And then hopefully we're going to, I think, skip a week after that, and then after that we will be back at 5 p.m. on Wednesdays.
Yes, we are going to be transitioning to the 5 o'clock hour for the live conversation, so that people who are theoretically busy working and parenting during the day can join in the conversation. So thank you all so much for being here. Thank you, Jamie, for your contribution to the conversation. Again, thank you, Sophia, for filling in a pinch. And Liza, thank you for being flexible with all the changes we have to go through with today.
No problem.
We'll see you next week, and